Created by the legendary Stephen King, Annie Wilkes was the antagonist of the 1987 novel Misery. She was introduced as a mentally ill nurse with an obsession with a famous author named Paul Sheldon, and she even went as far as to name her pet pig after some of his work. Today, we'll explore her role in King's work and in the 1990 film adaptation by Rob Reiner. Let's get into it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Anything else I can get while I'm in town? Any other crucial requirements that need?
Who is Annie Wilkes, also known as Anne Marie Wilkes or the Dragon Lady? Annie was a demented, mentally ill nurse with serial killer tendencies. She was also known for obsessing over Paul Sheldon's works, and she went as far as to name her pig after Sheldon's novel, Misery. While Annie initially had a normal reputation, the book revealed that she was responsible for killing many of her patients over the years. In fact, she also killed her father, roommate, and many infants. And Rob Reiner eventually adapted this story into a movie where she was portrayed by Kathy Bates. Annie was later introduced in the Castle Rock series, where she was portrayed by Lizzie Kaplan. Annie eventually started lurking around Paul Sheldon and tortured him to the extent that he was forced to revive his novel's main character, while her main goal was to successfully torture Paul Sheldon and then kill him before claiming her own life. She also spent a lot of her time tending to her pet and eating a whole lot of food. Annie was quite an intimidating character with advanced intellect, impressive manipulation skills, and command over a wide range of weapons. What is Annie's early life like? Born in Bakersfield, California, Annie Wilkes spent her early life pursuing a degree in nursing from the University of Southern California. After graduating in 1966, Annie acquired a position as the head maternity nurse at a hospital in Colorado, where many infants passed away under her care. All their deaths were under unknown circumstances, and while Annie was tried for their deaths, she was soon released due to a lack of evidence. However, she gained a reputation as the Dragon Lady from journalists who were following the case, and she was still perceived as guilty in the public's opinion. Over time, Paul Sheldon realized that she had been responsible for many more killings at other hospitals that she had worked at in the past. However, none of these deaths raised any suspicions and went largely unnoticed until the patients fell fatally sick or suffered concerning injuries. As more time passed, it was revealed that Annie had killed her own father, college roommate, and her childhood neighbors, establishing that her serial killer tendencies had emerged at a very young age. She once even killed a hitchhiker after letting him stay with her, and her total murder count was estimated to be around 70 people. While digging through her history, Paul also discovered that Annie had married a physical therapist named Ralph Dugan, who eventually divorced her on mental cruelty grounds. What is Annie's personality like? While Annie initially came across as a kind, caring person, it did not take long to show her true nature. She suffered from a bunch of mental illnesses, and a forensic psychologist named Dr. Reed Malloy once stated that she was like a virtual catalog of illnesses. While it is plain as day that she had psychopathic tendencies, Dr. Malloy suggested that she also had bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, as well as schizoid, schizotypal, and obsessive-compulsive features. Annie supposedly had several sadomasochistic features, along with psychosis, schizophrenia, and psychopathy. Dr. Malloy believed that her profile matched those of people who obsessively stalk celebrities, as she took a keen interest in Paul Sheldon. She often experienced extreme bouts of mood swings, depression, and paranoia, which was further evidence of her mental illnesses. Annie tried to hide her psychosis with a kind, friendly persona, and she could be extremely charming in one second, while going through a fit of rage in another. She often displayed destructive mood swings, but at the end of the day, she believed herself to be a devoted Christian. Annie often stated that God spoke to her and guided her, although this could be a delusion that she suffered as a result of her schizophrenia. In line with her religious persona, she hated profanity, and she would become extremely angry with people swearing around her. However, this delusion finally faded, and she ended up cursing at Paul in the film's final showdown. Annie was also quite susceptible to bouts of depression, and she also had low self-esteem and suicidal tendencies. She lived as a recluse and did not have any company, and she often feasted on large amounts of food and engaged in self-harm while struggling with depression. She also developed an unhealthy obsession with romance novels and was obsessed with Paul Sheldon's Misery series to the point where she could not differentiate between fiction and reality. She was a textbook psychopath and she maintained her house with diligence and was somewhat of a control freak who needed to exert power upon others. Annie's sadistic tendencies were the root cause of her crimes, and they compelled her to torture Paul and murder several infants and elderly people while working as a nurse. Her intelligence is also often debated, as she sometimes appears to be a slow, unsophisticated person, while at other times she is extremely perceptive and cunning while executing her plans. What happens in Misery? In the movie, Paul Sheldon's car gets caught in a horrid snowstorm, skids off the road, and falls directly on Annie's property. While he suffers from a bilateral fracture in his legs, Paul regains consciousness in Annie's house, and she assures him that she can take care of him, even though he is skeptical at first. Annie wins his heart with her caregiving nature, and he even lets her read one of his manuscripts in exchange for her kindness. He tells her all about his intentions to create new stories and retire old characters, such as Misery, Chastain. When Paul reveals that he decided to kill her off, Annie screams at him in a fit of rage and even forces him to burn his manuscript. She then forces him to rewrite the manuscript to ensure that Misery is alive and well, and goes as far as to tweak his medication to ensure that his pain does not interfere with his writing. Paul tries to escape from her house on numerous occasions, and Annie eventually ends up breaking his ankle with a sledgehammer, so he can't run away. She then claims that she loves him, but at the same time, she tortures him throughout the novel and the film. In one such instance, Paul complains about the defective end key on his typewriter in Stephen King's novel, and Annie retaliates by cutting off his thumb and using it as a candle for her birthday cake. She then feeds the cake to him and wishes him a happy birthday, while reassuring him that he won't have to feed on the special candle and that he can have some of the cake if he behaves. In the movie, Sheriff Buster makes his way to Annie's house while investigating Paul's disappearance and finds him tied up in her basement. However, Annie shoots him with a gun and then proceeds to kill Paul when he talks her into letting him live at least until he finishes the novel. As he wraps the novel up, he asks Annie for some wine and then sends her back to the kitchen to get a glass. When she returns, Paul seems to be on the verge of setting the book on fire, and he even holds out the page that reveals Misery's final fate. While Annie begs him not to burn it, Paul goes ahead and sets it on fire, declaring that he learned this from her. He then proceeds to bash her in the head with his typewriter to prevent her from extinguishing the fire, but Annie eventually manages to put it out. She then swears at him and tries to attack him, but Paul overpowers her and blinds her in one eye before throwing a punch at her face. As their fight escalated, Annie tried to shoot him to death, while Paul retaliated by banging her head against the floor and forcing her to choke on the burnt manuscript pages. While Annie managed to kick him away, he tripped her over, and she ended up hitting her head on the typewriter. He then believed her to be dead and tried to escape when Annie sneaked up on him, but he eventually overpowered her by grabbing a metal pig statue by Annie's door and smashing her head with it. In the novel, the police find Annie's body by the barn, and we learn that she had crawled out in a final attempt to grab her chainsaw when she succumbed to her injuries. Annie Wilkes in Castle Rock Explored. Portrayed by Lizzie Kaplan, Annie Wilkes was born to Carl and Crisilda Wilkes in Castle Rock. While her parents were quite conservative, Annie had quite a record of violence and was even kicked out of her school. Her parents refused to take her to a doctor or give her any special medications, and she was homeschooled for most of her childhood. Eventually, her parents hired a tutor named Rita, and things started looking up for Annie after she started helping her father with his writing. While he published a new novel, Annie's mother tried to kill her in a double suicide, and she barely survived the crash, only to discover that her father cheated on her mother with Rita. Her world came crashing down when she learned that Rita also had a child with her father, and she was quite lost without anybody to rely on. At this point, she blamed Rita for destroying her family and even kidnapped her baby, Evangeline. Even though Evangeline was technically Annie's half-sister, she started viewing her as her own child. She even renamed her Joy Wilkes and disappeared from her parents' house to create a new life. Annie never addressed the fact that Joy was a result of her father's affair with Rita, and only stated that Joy's father was an evil man. Soon enough, she started viewing her father's novel ideas as reality, and even dreamed of a laughing place where they could settle down. In the meantime, she spent her life on the run and took up temporary nurse jobs to create a good life for her and Joy. She also had a habit of raiding her clinic's pharmaceutical departments to get her hands on antipsychotics before running away and starting a new life all over again. She played a huge role in the second season of Castle Rock, and she first made an appearance when she got into a car accident and had no option but to seek refuge at the Stargazer Lodge while her car was being fixed. At this point, she had not had any antipsychotics in a week, and she felt extremely anxious. Her hallucinations also kept catching her off guard, and she often saw a man with a bloodied face and disfigured body. Somehow, she faked her identity and managed to get hired at Deauville Hospital, but she was soon caught by Dr. Nadia while she was stealing pills. While Annie was worried that she might report her, Dr. Nadia gave her a prescription for her pills instead, and Annie then wondered if she could settle down in Castle Rock with Joy. However, her landlord, Ace Merrill, soon discovered her true identity after surfing through the internet. He even threatened Joy, and Annie decided that she had no choice but to kill him in order to ensure her safety. She jammed an ice cream scoop down his throat and choked him to death before dumping his body at a mall construction site in Jerusalem's lot. However, she stumbled into a tomb while dumping his corpse, and she was stuck among coffins and age-old corpses with no option but to dig her way out through the Marston house. While Annie made her way back above ground level, Ace's uncle soon cornered her and asked her about his disappearance. She admitted to having a conversation with him, but soon constructed a rumor about a black man chasing him off into the woods. While she dodged this bullet, Annie soon started hallucinating Ace lurking around and went back to the Marston house to check whether she had disposed of his body properly. However, she ended up stumbling across a man dripping head to toe in slime, who even screamed at her and scared her into running away. She soon decided to confide in Joy and tell her that she had been hallucinating again, but this took a turn for the worse, as Joy ended up sedating her and tying her to the bed. Joy believed that Annie was going through a psychotic episode, and she forced her to take some pills, as they had decided in the past. Soon enough, Annie revealed that they were trying to dodge her father, and she tried to cut herself away from the bed by dislocating her shoulder and using broken glass to cut the ropes. She ended up injuring Joy as she tried to break free, and her paranoia scared her daughter/stepsister to run away while Annie once again hallucinated a tall man who told her that the only way to end this story was if she killed Joy. What are Annie's crimes? For starters, Annie had committed mass murder and infanticide throughout her career as a nurse, and she was also adept at manipulation and psychological torture. In addition to this, she had a history of kidnapping and stalking, and she even resorted to animal cruelty and attempted cannibalism in the novels. Annie's first crimes were recorded in the year 1954, when she killed the entire Crinmans family, including 3 kids, in a house fire. She also killed Irving Thalman in this same fire, and she then waited for 3 years before killing her father, Carl Wilkes, by smashing his skull and breaking his neck. About 5 years down the line, Annie killed her college roommate, as well as their shared pet, before getting jobs at various hospitals and claiming the lives of her patients. She started out at St. Joseph's Hospital in 1969, where she killed Ernest Gonyar, Hester Bulifant, and Paulette Simo, even though all their deaths were logged as illnesses. She then moved on to the Denver Hospital, where she claimed Laura Rothberg's life, even though she supposedly died from long illness. She then stuck around at this hospital until 1982, where she killed several infants, including girl Christopher. After retiring, Annie mutilated her former lover, Andrew Pomeroy, to death in 1984 at the age of 23, before killing another young man named Dwayne Kushner by running him over with a lawnmower. Marvelous verdict. And with that, we have explored Annie Wilkes' entire life history across Stephen King's novel as well as Rob Reiner's film adaptation. Her psychopathic tendencies, paired with her mental illnesses, made her a complex antagonist, and we would love to hear your thoughts on her in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.